if I told you today that Africa is no longer fighting just the political, economic wars? It's also fighting the narrative war. Who tells African story, how the story of Africa is portrayed to the world. Some people just believe that Africa is a country, not knowing that Africa has over 54 states, 54 countries that make up, is a whole continent that consists of many, many, many countries. So if you're new to my channel, you're welcome. Here I talk about things I find interesting about Africa. So do take a moment to subscribe. Most of these major powers fighting for or wanting African natural resources, and also installing or putting in governments that will be more favorable for what they want in Africa. Africa's narrative is told by the medias of these Western countries, and however they want to present Africa to the world is how people perceive Africa. Because whichever that controls the narrative, controls the perception of how people see you. See, Africa for decades has been described to the world not by Africans, but by outsiders. Whatever narrative sometimes most of these international media houses come up with about Africa, the narrative they give out to the world, they push out to the world about Africa, that's how many parts of the world, how other parts of the world see Africa. Narratives shapes how people see you. Stories about things people tell about you shapes how people see you. Nobody can dispute that. So in the case of Africa, the narratives put out there shapes how Africa is seen when it comes to foreign policies, shapes the lens or the lenses upon which most people who are not Africans see Africa, It shapes the foreign investment decisions. It shapes tourism. Most people may not even want to come to Africa. It depends on what people tell you about Africa. It shapes ads. It shapes even how Africans see themselves. What kind of image do you think that most of these international medias are portraying about Africa? How other people see African continents? The most of these big international media houses like BBC, France 24, CNN has enormous reach, very, very massive reach. Their framing or narrative about Africa influences how Africa is seen globally. But this is not to say that they say only negative things about Africa. But historically, or if you watch the trend, their coverage is mostly on things that has to do with war, famine, corruption, and a lot of negative things being portrayed out to the world. But meanwhile, there are massive, massive infrastructural developments going on in Africa, new innovations, tech growth, intellectual movements. But it's up against all this. African solutions receive less global attention because these narrative imbalances are not accidental. They help shape global hierarchy on how things are run in the world. Let's take, for example, during the colonial rule, the European colonial rule on Africa, they controlled both the territories and the information they give out to the world about Africa. And they tagged Africa as uncivilized, people that need guidance, people who are not able to govern themselves. And that is the narrative they sold out to the world about Africa. You see, this narrative of the colonial powers, the colonial rule, helped to justify the exploitation of the African natural resources they did way back. See, even after independence, information pipelines about Africa largely comes from the West, the Western control media. You see, major global news agencies supplied significant percentage of African international news and content out to the world. So whatever they feed to the world about Africa, that's what the world knows about Africa. So that means that the global news about Africa is often non-African persons and non-African sources. So the question remains, will African stories or narratives continue to be told by sources that are not African? So today, even the narrative war of Africa is even becoming more complex because it's not just the Western media alone. The Western media has done or is still doing their part, and also the Asian media, the CGTN. Asian media is expanding its influence in Africa because most of these major powers knows that whoever that has influence, whoever that controls the narrative of a people, controls public opinion. So what is the way forward for Africa? It looks very simple, but it's a very big tool in shaping or influencing how public opinions are formed. Someone that tells your story, tells your vulnerability or your strength. So in the case of Africa, a lot of things has been said about Africa to the world that makes Africa very vulnerable, very poor, very volatile, very unstable. So what is the way forward? Should Africa remain quiet? So this is the uncomfortable truth. There is no doubt that African continent has been facing some of the internal challenges. Weak continental collaborations, whereby African countries, journalists can connect to tell the stories of Africa themselves as it is. Even some media houses lack resources for investigative journalism, you see, and this keeps on creating vulnerability. This is why African media should rise up to tell their story, no matter how difficult, because it's not always about propaganda. You can't keep watching the world tell your story. It should be about what perspective are you putting out to the world, or what Africans has done, over things, and also showcase solutions that has been given by Africans. How to change the psychology on how people see Africa or hear about Africa, or how they perceive Africans around the world. So thank goodness for the rise of digital era in these recent times, because the monopoly of these big media houses over Africa's story is breaking. African stories can be told by Africans individually on many media platforms: YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. So you see, this is a very big opportunity, that Africa is just a beautiful place like other parts of the world. Because history has always shown that when others defines you, it really benefits you. So if you watch up to this point and you believe Africans should tell their stories, say it as it is, present their story and their narrative to the world. Comment in the comment section, Africa must speak, because we need to tell the stories of Africa as it is. So thank you for watching. See you on the next one.